Hello once again, everyone. So, a question came up recently that I wanted to cover in a full video because I haven't talked about it before. I mean, I've briefly mentioned it, but essentially what it is, hey, how come we never talk about middle cuts when it comes to longswords? So if you don't know what I mean by middle cut, Mittlehau or mezzana or vendrito / reverso tando, what I'm essentially talking about is going to be a number 6 and number 5 cut if you are familiar with the general cutting pattern as numbered. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when it comes to most one-handed sword systems, you will see them a bit more, especially as you get further on in time period. But when it comes to longsword, we don't necessarily see Mittlehau very often at all. They are mentioned, of course, and they are usually present on some cutting patterns, but they don't get a ton of love. And so I want to talk about some instances in which the Mittlehau is used, and how it is used, and why it's not used as much as you might expect. So first and foremost, when it comes to throwing a Mittlehau, there are many different ways you can do it, right? I can, of course, throw a Mittlehau at any angle between, as Fiore puts it, a mezzana goes from the knee to the head, right? So I can throw this at, here, I could throw that at middle, I could throw that at neck. It's very easy for me to do. And of course you can throw it from either side. Furthermore, you can throw it with either edge. So for example, if we look at the Kolner-Effect book, that has us cut with the long edge, turn over, cut with the long edge, versus Fiore, when he says his mezzana, long edge, short edge coming back. Many Montante sources also recommend using the short edge when cutting from your non-dominant side, as well as a couple other instances of it appearing. Furthermore, you can of course also use the short edge coming from this side, but either way, the best way I would say to throw an effective Mittlehau is going to be like so. What you'll want to do is, from whatever position you're fighting from, it doesn't really matter, you want to make sure that your hands are lower than the tip. So my hands are about here, and my tip is rising slightly. If they're in line with each other, it's still okay, but I do not want to be doing this sort of thing, right? That's just not terribly powerful, but we will come back to it, right? Now, at the same time, I'm wanting to make sure I take hard offline step. So as I go to deliver my Mittlehau, I'm going to step wide in the direction the cut is coming from, and then just kind of let it carry me out of distance. Now, this is a little different than when I would be throwing, for example, an Oberhau. With an Oberhau or something along those lines, I tend to be stepping, yes, offline, but I'm going up against my target, versus with the Mittlehau, usually I'm not quite stepping as far forward, and I'm more focused on lateral motion. And that applies to both sides. Now, okay, we can throw the Mittlehau. Why don't we see it? Well, you do see it, but the contexts are very few, and the reason being is because it doesn't have a ton of leverage. So, planes of attack, right? We've got descending line here, descending line here. Usually a 45-degree angle or a 30-degree angle are best, right? 30s are particularly nice, but they are a little more sheer. So if you're fighting someone who cuts a little bit outside of their frame, then 45 is nicer, versus you're fighting someone who's going for the center line, it's all about that 30. But that's ascending and descending. The problem with that is that if a 45/30 and one of these 4 angles intercepts each other, then they naturally clash, right? So if you're cutting from your side against me, and I cut from my right against you, boom, our swords will meet here in the middle, and we kind of have equal pressure, barring the exception of one of us getting the better of it, right? And in general, it's going to end up locking that out that way. Even if, for example, I don't get the better of it, but I still do my cut, this still defends me a decent amount because I can move up and down along the axis that you cut on, and it keeps me safe, versus the axis that I cut on makes you unsafe. This also applies if you were cutting from below. So for example, you're cutting up from here, I'm cutting down from my right. If we intercept each other, the same still applies. I'm keeping myself safe this way, I'm just making you unsafe closer along the same line, and even it can apply to cuts going on the exact same side. So you're cutting from your bottom left, I cut from my top right, we intercept against each other. You are usually going to win that because you can lift mine out of the way, but it's not impossible for me to stifle you here. Usually it's best if I then turn and meet, right? But all in all, leverage-wise, with a few exceptions, will be decently even by default. However, if you are now cutting along one of those 45s, be it from above or below, and I throw a Mittlehau, now we intercept each other, right? Yes, I can still keep myself relatively safe, but the problem is the area in which I'm making you unsafe, I'm now having to fight to get it to go there, versus before gravity was assisting me. Or if I'm coming from below, my guard is actually keeping me safer. Usually when I come from below, I'm actually a little bit safer because I'm, of course, moving it up to defend my head, and the tip follows by proxy. Mittel, though, I don't really have a ton of leverage. Not to mention, biomechanically, I don't have as much support. So if you look at it, when I finish a cut, my hand should be like so, right? Both of my hands are behind the blade, and it's making that triangle shape, right? So we've got corner, corner, core, right? My legs are basically doing the same thing. So lead leg, lead arm, back leg, off arm, all lined up with the core, and I'm strong that way, right? You know, regardless of what side or what angle I do that from, I'm always trying to make that alignment. However, when I cut from the middle, now I don't have that same power anymore. Each of these is holding each other up individually as opposed to being centrally united. Even if my hands are super close together, they're still not nearly as difficult to force downward or upward because they aren't supporting each other in quite the same way. Thus, when you end up in these binds, if you throw a middle cut, oftentimes you will be defeated by a cut coming in on a diagonal angle. So as such, it's generally not a great idea to use as a purely offensive tactic. However, there are situations in which it comes up, so let's go over a few. Usually it'll be used as a secondary action or when you are voiding widely. So essentially, right, if it's a cut that doesn't necessarily keep me super safe, but I do want to throw it, the best way to compensate is if I can't defend with the sword, I defend with my movement. So in the example of, in which I believe it's Sigmund Ringek, we have an incoming Zwerkow. And I've talked about this before if you've watched the Wallerstein vids, but essentially, when the Zwerkow comes in, it terminates at this point, right? Even if I throw a super powerful Zwerk, that's as far as my cut can go. At that point, I'm not cutting anything anymore. As such, you end up in this position where the Zwerk is coming around, so it's coming toward my head. What I'm going to do, and what we see happen multiple times, is movement with the Zwerk, and then, for example, in Messer, you'd be doing it on the other side, but anyway, you would cover yourself and then thrust with throwing a Zwerk underneath the Zwerk, so he's coming around this side. I once again move with him and strike underneath the strike, or things of that nature. Wallerstein, again, the Zwerk came over and we suppressed it, things like that. But what you can also do is throw a Mittlehau while retreating. So here comes that Zwerk again, going for my head. So as that cut is coming around, I am going to step wide away from it and throw a very long Mittlehau toward their torso. Usually I target about the ribs right there. What I'm doing is I'm voiding their cut, which is going for a very small part of me, and it can only go so far. So I just need to get to about here, and I'm safe, right? I'm not safe from further reprisal, but I've maximized my chances of getting a clean hit. And furthermore, even if I don't hit them, and this wound probably is not going to drop them, not saying it couldn't, but probably is not going to. At the very least, I have injured my opponent, gotten myself out of a sticky situation, and that is due to the Mittlehau, because that is the main advantage of Mittelhaus, is that they have more reach, right? Even if I super extend, by turning my arms over, I can get to the tiniest bit more, especially when it comes to using wide offline steps, right? If I cut at a 30 or a 45, but super wide, floor, bad habit, that's about as much as I get, versus if I cut a middle, I can get a lot because I can kind of lean into it without compromising my structure, etc. And so in this situation, a middle is my best choice. Not to mention it's very easy to do under panic situation, which makes this such a great play. And that works on both sides. The same play, again later, will show the attack coming around this side, and once again we step wide and deliver a cut to defend ourselves. So, that's one situation which the Mittlehau comes up. We're using our void to compensate for the fact that we don't have a ton of defense. Okay, so what about another situation? Another situation in which the Mittlehau, specifically this is the Mezzana, comes up, is actually, and this also kind of explains why Fiore, at least in my opinion, why Fiore likes to throw the Mezzana from his left with his short edge, is whenever we throw strikes from our dominant side, he seems to like to use the long edge. Not saying, we can't actually confirm whether or not he does his Sotani with the short edge on this side as well. We know he likes doing it with the short edge on this side, which makes sense, right? It's very powerful, very simple. But oftentimes, when a strike comes in, we'll have moments where we suppress it, right? Sometimes we suppress it all the way down, follow up with a Sotani that hits them. That would be an Unterhau with the false edge, right? But other times, that isn't available, right? We push them, but we didn't quite get them down, or even sometimes we cover over here and now I'm higher than I want to be. There's my Mezzana with the false edge. So their sword is here, my sword is between them, and my sword, boom! That's why I would use the false edge. As, sure, I could turn over and cut, and certainly I can put my hips into that and hit pretty hard, but why would I? That is a faster cut, it's going to hit him sooner, and it still keeps me safe against what they might do. So that would be a situation in which, again, a Mittlehau could come up, and specifically it's a Mittlehau with the false edge. Now, another situation in which the Mittlehau can come up is as a duplieren. So a duplieren means doubling, quite literally, and it's essentially I'm going to attack twice, but also not quite. So what'll happen is I'll strike in with various amounts of strikes, right? I'll strike in, you'll defend, and as you're pushing against my blade, not against me, not against my tip, but against my blade, I can slip the pommel underneath my arm and attack you from behind your own blade. Now, this, like I said, can come in a variety of ways. You can even see a duplieren happen along this line or things of that nature. But specifically when you do it out of the Zornhau, oftentimes it ends up finishing, I would classify that as a Mittelhau. Sometimes it comes as a bit more of a leftover, but usually it's going to be coming along kind of this degree. Thus, I would call that a Mittelhau, and that happens on both sides. So, again, that's a situation in which a Mittelhau comes up, and once again, it's behind the blade. In which case, we're generally looking for reach, and also we have already either dealt with our opponent's sword, or we are moving ourselves in such a way that they cannot hit us, right? And that's the thing about duplierens especially, is because we're attacking behind the blade, a lot of people don't feel safe doing it. The biggest thing is you're looking for the stimulus of them pushing against your sword. So they're purely focused on that, which means we can get away with this. You can also add cross-stepping and other fun things in with it that make it extra sweet, and then I void with my body. Now, the final and kind of most common Mittelhau that you're going to see, well, actually one more. Technically a Geisling is a Mittelhau. So Geisling means whipping, and for a Geisling, Geisling, I've heard it both ways. Geisling, I believe, is closer to the actual initial pronunciation, but unfortunately it's one of those things that's a habit with me. Forgive my German. But either way, I just release and I whip it down across and I take someone out at the shins or the knees. Very common technique from about, 2010 HEMA. That I would classify as a Mittelhau, and it's just releasing, cutting through, and we'll also see sometimes those strikes delivered at about head level or things like that, both modern day and historically. So that's a Mittelhau, not a great Mittelhau, but once again, it's using maximum range and also covering maximum amount of, attack, right? If I throw an over, I can cover that much, right? I'm hitting within this plane where the cut terminates and where the cut initially entered. With the middle, I can hit anything within that before I lose power. So it's quite good for dealing with people that step to the side. But the more common Mittelhau that you're going to see, and I guarantee you've seen it, I guarantee you've probably even thrown it, is going to be the Zwerchau. Zwerchau is a Mittelhau? Yes, it is, right? So the Zwerchau, I stick my thumb up on the blade, and I'm striking like that, right? The helicopter-looking thingy. Well, that is a cut with both the false edge and the long edge coming in at a horizontal angle. Yes, it gets an extra name because you're doing something specific with your thumbs, but I would still argue that is a Mittelhau. It's hitting on a horizontal plane, uses either edge, and furthermore, it can hit anywhere between the head and the knee, just like our other descriptions of the Mittelhau. So, while yes, it is something a little more special and defends your head, right, I would still qualify it as a Mittelhau. So, there's a more commonly used one that most people don't think of as a Mittelhau. So, there you go. Now, I did mention earlier that we'd come back to this where I don't recommend throwing mittels with your hands above it. is because the Zwerk is better in every way, shape, or form, right? Not that you can't throw a cut like that and make it work, it's just, well, if you're already here, you're better off here. This makes more sense, keeps you stronger, and gives you more control for follow-ups. As from the Zwerko, we can launch into, hey, it's that Duclaren again, right? And things like that. But either way, I'm not here to talk, how to actually do techniques. Just wanted to go over what the Mittlehau is, why you don't necessarily see it a ton, but it is still absolutely a very useful cut. And when you apply it in the right circumstances, which, again, there aren't many plays that use it, but when you are just categorizing cuts, or for example, when I talked about the 8 cut, I mentioned this really comes up mostly when I'm trying to describe it to somebody else, then yeah, this is a situation in which knowing how to say a Mittlehau can be kind of useful. And it may surprise you, you may end up like, oh, I guess I am throwing a bit more of a Mittel in some situations. And yeah, but either way, that's just a quick little vid on Mittelhaus, why they're not seen more commonly. They tend to be seen a lot more commonly later period because with one hand I can attack and guard much easier. And certainly the 6 cut is a great guy to use. 5 cut as well, very strong, but you don't see it as much with longsword or other two-handed weapons of that nature. But either way, thank you very much for watching, and we will go over some other techniques another time.